again. And so we're already up to part 3. So okay, now looking at this next section, we're looking at what the features and the purpose of human rights are. And these are just kind of the main concepts. And so I just want to run through these concepts. And again, you'll come back to this in your tutorials and also the group exercise. But it's kind of important to nail these down to make sure you understand. So human rights are different to, say, citizens' rights or consumer rights or student rights or whatever other type of rights, because they have these kind of 3 unique features. One is that human rights are inherent. You get them when you're born. You don't have to do anything to earn them. You always already have human rights, even if you don't know it. So you're a small baby, you're a 2-year-old baby, you have human rights whether you know it or not. Now this is different from sometimes like criminal, in terms of crimes, because sometimes if you don't know a crime has been committed upon you, then it's not a crime. It really has to be reported to the police for that to be considered a crime. And in many cases, it's up to the person to decide if that's a crime or not. If someone comes up and hits you in the face, you can choose to do nothing about that and say that's not a crime. Now that's different from human rights, because you don't decide whether that's a human right or not, because your rights are inherent, as we'll look at the case study. So it means you don't have to earn human rights. You don't deserve to get them because you are well disciplined and you're a good citizen. You have human rights whether you're a good citizen or not. Now, next important feature is human rights are inalienable. They can't be taken away. Now, this doesn't mean that you can't have some rights taken away. So, for example, if you go to prison, you lose your freedom of movement, and you may lose, say, your freedom of political participation. But that doesn't mean you lose your human rights. So inalienable means that once you're a human, you can't use them. It doesn't matter how bad you are, what you've done, whether you're a non-citizen, whether you're a mass murderer, no matter how bad you are, you always have human rights. Now, in terms of what specific rights you have, that's going to depend on who you are and where you are. The third important concept here is universal. Human rights are universal, which means that everyone has human rights. Now, one thing about this is actually written down. They're written down wrong. It's not everyone has the same human rights, because that's not true. Everyone has human rights, but they don't have the same human rights. Okay, so universal means that it doesn't matter where you are, who you are, doesn't matter anything about how old you are. If you're on the moon, if you're in the middle of the ocean, you still, as a human, you have human rights. But what specific rights you have is going to depend on a lot of things. Okay, so everyone has human rights, but the actual rights that they have depends on who you are, where you are, and what you are. So if even looking at these, all of us here in this classroom today, different people have different rights. So men and women are going to have different rights. Adults and children are going to have different rights. Not that any of you are children, but adults and children have different rights, because children have children's rights. Each of us have our rights, which are recognized in our country. So being in Thailand, you get certain rights. Being in Myanmar, you get a different set of rights. Okay, pretty much they're pretty much the same, but they do differ in some ways. Then also it could be that as a non-citizen, you get slightly different rights than being a citizen. Now, okay, so it means that you do get these slightly different rights, but overall, like 90% of the rights that we have are the same. They vary in terms of things like, say, maybe your access to government services is going to be different if you're a citizen or a non-citizen. Your political rights and rights around voting may differ according to the country you're in. Also, things like freedom of expression very much depend on the country you're in. We know that Thailand has big limitations on freedom of expression, but say United States doesn't. So your rights are going to vary according to what country you're in. Okay, now the next one is looking at the purpose of human rights. So human rights are there to ensure that everyone gets treated with dignity. So the concept of dignity, it's a funny concept, but it means that humans should be treated with respect. humans should be treated as humans. They shouldn't be treated as animals or robots, or machines. So the point of human rights is to make sure humans get treated with dignity. Now that means, for example, if we look at, say, the right to food, the right to food is just not 2,200 calories a day. And that can be delivered as an energy bar once a day. The right to food means that you get food which is kind of appropriate to you and your community and your culture, and you eat that in a way that treats you like a human being. Okay, so that means it may respect your cultural views around food. It means that you kind of eat the food that you know. You can see there's a difference there between a basic need, which is just the 2,200 calories, and the human right to food, which means a sustainable source of food, which kind of which you eat, off a plate or however you normally eat. Much like the right to housing and adequate, and the right to shelter. The right to shelter could be a cardboard box under a bridge, because that is a form of shelter. But the right to housing means you live in a house like other human beings live in a house. Okay, so that's why human dignity is an important part of human rights. Now, the next important purpose of human rights is to recognize that human rights means that everyone should be treated equally or should be treated with non-discrimination. There's a slight distinction, like most human rights are treated, you have that right equally, but not every human right you have equal rights. Like the right to work doesn't mean that everyone equally has a right to a job. You have a right to be selected for a job based on non-discrimination. Much like the right to education, all children have equal rights to primary education. When it comes to university, not everyone has equal rights to a university. As you know, the right to be a part of this program of the master's program at IHRP, that's not equal to everyone. But to do that, you've got to have a bachelor's degree. You've got to have you've got to be able to speak English and so on. You've got these kind of various choices which you have to do to ensure that you can do the course and you can fit in. Okay, so non-discrimination means that you get your rights respected and you're not picked on something subjective or eliminated or discriminated based on something subjective like sex or age or color and so on. Again, the last purpose is to ensure justice and the rule of law. So these are quite important concepts in human rights. So we have justice in the human law to make sure everyone gets treated equally and fairly. So there's a sense of equality there, equal before the law. There's a sense of fairness there and justice, that the law is there to ensure everyone feels like they get treated, they get a sense of justice and how they were treated. And everyone is protected by the law as well. Okay. So last one, let's just unpack this concept of non-discrimination a little. Okay. Because non-discrimination is often open to a lot of debate. Non-discrimination means that you don't get penalized about something which is not relevant to you. Like if we said to be enrolled in a master's degree at the IHRP, you've got to have short hair. That's an example of discrimination because your hair length is irrelevant to studying. Same thing if we said if it depends on your religion or your age or your skin color. These are all examples of kind of categories which are irrelevant, which is subjective. Discrimination must be based on some kind of objective criteria that's necessary. So when you pick people for a job, you can have objective criteria that they should be able to do these certain things. Okay, so for example, we've got there, I've already mentioned that before, the objective criteria for being an IHRP student is an undergraduate degree, the English language for the English language masters, or the Thai language for the Thai language masters, and then your experience or interest in human rights, because it just means that we're going to pick students who are the most relevant or who are going to get value out of the course. Okay, let me just pause there for a second.